So today I'm going to show you guys how to replace an oil cooler seal on your Mazda Miata. The oil cooler seal is this little O-ring, much like a rubber O-ring that goes on an oil filter. It's actually almost exactly the same size, but here's the one from Mazda. It goes in between the oil cooler and the block. How it works is your oil filter sits on top of the oil cooler, and then in between the oil cooler and the block is the O-ring, just like that. So this is a good thing to do while you're doing an oil change. So first thing is going to be to jack up the car once it's cooled down, open the hood, and get underneath it like you're going to do an oil change. As always, remember to use proper jacks, proper jack stands, and wheel chocks. And then it's not a bad idea to give your car a little shake, because when you're going to be underneath it, you want to make sure that it's not going to fall on top of you. So I'm going to assume most of y'all watching know where the oil filter is. Probably have done that before, but you go underneath the intake manifold. There it is. See, but it's right there underneath the intake manifold. So you're going to unscrew this, and then there's going to be a nut holding on the oil cooler. You're going to undo that nut. You don't have to undo the coolant lines. You're going to undo the nut, and then you should be able to replace the little O-ring just like on the oil filter. Basically, that is your oil filter housing. You're going to undo that nut in the middle and then pull that off, and you should be able to swing it out hanging on the coolant lines, and replace the O-ring behind it. So I got the nut loose. I believe it is a 1 1/8 inch, but you have to use a long socket. I didn't have a 1/8 inch in a deep well socket, so I used a 30 millimeter. I think 1 1/8 inch ends up being around 28 or 29 millimeters, but this worked and it didn't seem to strip it or anything, so it's not on there too tight. I think it's supposed to be 30 foot-pounds. But yeah, so got that off, and I'm going to spin out the nut now. So without the nut on, you should be able to just slide this off the back, and it should be able to pivot on these coolant lines. There we go. And so that's just going to dangle on those coolant lines, and you can see the little O-ring that's behind there. It's the red thing. Nice. That's the same thing, except for you'll see this one's a little smushed from existing. So here's the old and the new O-ring. You can see, well, actually y'all can't see it that well, but the old O-ring is smushed down a little bit. Other than that, they're the exact same. So I'm just going to take this one, oil it up, slide it into a little channel that it goes into on the back of the oil cooler, put the nut back on, and then go about doing an oil change like usual. So now that nut is back on the oil filter and torqued down to about 30 foot-pounds, and now you're just going to make sure you lube that up first, and then lube up the oil filter O-ring and put it on, and then the rest is just like a regular oil change. So if you have an oil leak coming from sort of this portion of your subframe, or like the back area, I was very concerned about it, but I looked up here and you can see the bottom of the oil filter. Mine just had oil, would drip off the end, and I'd lose about like a quarter of a quart every tank of gas. But if you're concerned, and if you see oil coming along the bottom of your oil filter, most likely it's coming from the seal in between the oil cooler and the block itself. Yeah, so it goes oil filter, there's an O-ring, oil cooler, which goes all the way back to there, and then behind there is a seal against the block.
And so, yeah, just it's a good idea to clean everything off with brake cleaner when you're done, and that way, if a leak does come back, you'll be able to see it because it'll be new oil.
No leaks.